Sienna Parker sighed as she pushed open the glass door of her favorite cafe, the Clover Bean. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, wrapping her in its familiar comfort. It was her safe haven, the one place she could momentarily escape the chaos of her high-pressure job at Blackwood Enterprises, one of London's top tech firms. She'd been working there for 3 years, climbing the corporate ladder, but lately, she felt exhausted. The never-ending deadlines, demanding bosses, and office politics were draining her. Coming to this cafe before work had become her little ritual, a moment of peace before diving into the battlefield of the corporate world. She stepped toward the counter, her mind preoccupied with the upcoming meetings of the day. "1 caramel latte, please," she ordered, not bothering to look up. "Coming right up," a deep voice replied. Sienna blinked. That wasn't the usual barista's voice. Curiosity got the best of her, and she glanced up. The man behind the counter was unexpected. He wasn't the regular barista she saw every morning. Instead, this man was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a ruggedly handsome face that belonged in a high-end magazine, not behind a coffee counter. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing toned forearms. She quickly looked away, realizing she'd been staring. "You're new here?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He gave her a small, amused smile as he expertly crafted her drink. "Just helping out." That wasn't exactly an answer, but she didn't push. It wasn't her business why he was there. Moments later, he placed her drink in front of her. "Caramel latte, just how you like it." Sienna raised an eyebrow. "How do you know how I like it?" The man leaned slightly on the counter, his smirk growing. "You come here almost every day. It's hard not to notice." She was taken aback. She hadn't realized she was that predictable. "Well, thank you." She glanced at his name tag. "Adrian." "Anytime," he replied smoothly. She took her drink and walked toward her usual corner seat, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. Something about him intrigued her, but she shook it off. He was just a barista, and she had work to do. The next morning, Sienna woke up with an odd sense of anticipation. She tried to ignore it, but a part of her was eager to return to the Clover Bean, wondering if Adrian would be there again. She arrived at the cafe earlier than usual, her eyes immediately scanning the counter. He wasn't there. Instead, the usual barista, Jenny, was back in her spot, greeting Sienna with a bright smile. "Morning, Sienna. The usual?" Jenny asked. Sienna hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yeah, the usual." As she waited for her drink, she casually asked, "So where's Adrian?" Jenny's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she quickly masked it. "Oh, he was just helping out for a day. Someone called in sick." "Oh." Sienna tried not to sound too interested. She took her coffee and left for work, brushing aside whatever curiosity lingered in her mind. It didn't matter. She was never going to see him again anyway. When she reached the towering glass building of Blackwood Enterprises, the air inside was buzzing with an unusual energy. People whispered in hushed tones, groups huddled together, gossiping excitedly. Sienna frowned. "What's going on?" she asked Claire, her colleague from the marketing department. Claire turned to her, eyes wide. "Haven't you heard? We're getting a new CEO today." Sienna's brows knitted. "Wait, what? I thought Mr. Donovan was still in charge." Claire shook her head. "Nope. He retired early, and apparently the board has already appointed someone new. No one knows much about him, though. Just that he's young, insanely rich, and super private." Sienna absorbed the information, not thinking too much of it. CEOs changed all the time. It didn't really affect her work. She made her way to her desk, opening her laptop and diving into her tasks for the morning. By noon, all employees received an email summoning them to the main conference hall for an official introduction to the new CEO. Sienna sighed. She hated long, formal meetings, but skipping this one wasn't an option. She walked into the grand conference hall, finding a seat toward the back. The entire company was gathered, the murmur of voices filling the air as they speculated about their new boss. Then, the doors opened. A tall man entered, walking toward the front with effortless confidence. He was dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, the fabric hugging his broad shoulders and lean frame perfectly. His presence alone commanded attention, and the room fell into stunned silence. Sienna's heart stopped. It was him, Adrian. Her mind went blank as he turned to face the crowd, his expression cool and composed. "Good afternoon," he spoke into the microphone, his deep voice resonating through the hall. "My name is Adrian Blackwood. As of today, I will be taking over as CEO of Blackwood Enterprises." The room erupted into whispers. Some people gasped. Others exchanged looks of shock. Sienna gripped the armrest of her chair. Blackwood? As in Blackwood Enterprises. Her stomach twisted. The man she had assumed was just a simple barista was actually the billionaire heir of the very company she worked for. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction she had with him at the cafe. The casual way she had spoken to him, the way she had mistaken him for just another worker. And now, he was her boss. Sienna sat frozen in her seat, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Adrian Blackwood, her new CEO, the same man who had made her caramel latte just yesterday. She could hear the buzz of conversations around her as employees whispered excitedly, their eyes locked onto the billionaire standing at the front of the room. But all she could focus on was the heat creeping up her neck. Had she said anything embarrassing to him at the cafe? Had she unknowingly acted too casual with someone who now had the power to fire her with a single word? She swallowed hard. Adrian stood confidently, his sharp gaze scanning the crowd before he continued speaking. "I understand that changes in leadership can bring uncertainty," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. "But I want to assure you that my priority is the continued success of this company. I expect hard work, dedication, and innovation from each of you. In return, I will ensure that Blackwood Enterprises remains a company that values its employees." There was a round of polite applause. Sienna, however, barely registered it. She was too focused on the way Adrian carried himself, so different from the man she had met at the cafe. He had been easygoing, almost playful behind the counter, but now, standing before them in an expensive suit, he was unreadable, his expression carefully controlled. Had she imagined the warmth in his voice back then? The thought unsettled her. The meeting ended with the HR director outlining a few procedural updates. As employees started filing out of the conference hall, Sienna tried to slip away unnoticed. The last thing she wanted was to cross paths with Adrian today, but fate had other plans. Sienna Parker. She stopped in her tracks. Her breath hitched as she turned, and there he was, Adrian Blackwood, looking directly at her. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Yes, sir?" she managed to say, keeping her expression neutral. A flicker of amusement crossed his face at the formal title, but he didn't comment on it. "Come to my office. We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. Oh God, this was it. He was going to fire her for speaking to him like an ordinary barista. "Of course, sir," she said, forcing herself to stay composed. She followed him out of the conference hall, her legs feeling like lead. Employees glanced curiously at her as she walked past them, whispers following in her wake. Sienna Parker, personally called in by the new CEO, the rumors would spread like wildfire. Adrian's office was on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. The room itself was sleek and modern, dominated by a massive mahogany desk. He gestured for her to sit before moving behind the desk, loosening his tie slightly as he settled into his chair. "So," he said, leaning forward, "you look like you've seen a ghost." Sienna blinked. I just wasn't expecting," she exhaled sharply. "I had no idea you were Adrian Blackwood." His lips quirked. "I gathered as much." She frowned slightly. "Why were you working as a barista?" Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I wasn't working as a barista. I was simply helping out. The clover bean is one of my investments. The manager is an old friend, and when one of the employees called in sick, I stepped in for fun. Sienna's brows shot up. For fun? A billionaire casually making lattes for fun? That was absurd. Why not? Adrian shrugged. It's refreshing. People treat you differently when they don't know who you are. She couldn't argue with that. She certainly had. And what about you, Sienna? He asked, tilting his head slightly. What were you thinking when you saw me behind that counter? She hesitated. I thought you were just a barista. His expression didn't change, but she could swear there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. And did that change how you treated me? She swallowed. I hope not. Adrian nodded, tapping his fingers on the desk. Good. A pause stretched between them. Then he said, I like you, Sienna. Her breath caught in her throat. I like people who don't treat me differently because of my last name. That's why I wanted to talk to you personally. Sienna frowned slightly. You called me here just to tell me that? His lips curved into a slight smile. And to let you know that I expect great things from you. I've read your reports. You're one of the best in your department. She blinked, taken aback. You've read my reports? Of course, he said simply. I make it a point to know my top employees. Her heart pounded. This was surreal. Adrian Blackwood, Billionaire CEO, had not only interacted with her as a barista, but had also been aware of her work long before this day. I look forward to working with you, Sienna, he said, standing up. That will be all for now. Sienna took the cue, standing as well. Thank you, sir. As she turned to leave, she felt his eyes on her, and for the first time since discovering the truth about him, she wondered, had he already known who she was when he made her that caramel latte? Sienna walked out of Adrian's office, her heart still pounding. Her entire perception of him had shifted in an instant. Just yesterday, she had thought he was a charming, down-to-earth barista. Now he was her billionaire boss, someone with immeasurable power over her career. Had she treated him differently because she had assumed he was just an ordinary worker? She had been herself, and yet knowing his real identity now made everything feel different. As she stepped into the elevator, her mind raced. Had Adrian known who she was back at the cafe? If he had read her reports and knew she was one of the top employees in her department, it was possible that their meeting hadn't been a coincidence at all. But why would he do that? Was he testing her? The thought unsettled her. The moment she returned to her desk, Claire was already waiting, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. What the hell was that about? Claire whispered excitedly. Why did the new CEO call you into his office? Sienna sighed, rubbing her temples. Nothing dramatic. He just wanted to talk about my work. Claire narrowed her eyes. Just that? Yes, Sienna said firmly, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Claire didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Well, whatever it is, people are talking, she said. You should check the company group chat. Sienna hesitated before pulling up the company's internal chat platform. Sure enough, the messages were rolling in fast. Did you see? Sienna Parker got called into the CEO's office first thing. She must be in trouble, or maybe something else. Maybe she knew him before? Sienna groaned. This was exactly what she didn't want, attention. The next few days were strange. Ever since that meeting in his office, Adrian had taken a noticeable interest in her. He didn't act inappropriately. There were no lingering stares or suggestive comments, but his presence was undeniable. During meetings, his gaze would find hers. If she voiced an idea, he listened more intently than he did with anyone else. When she entered a room, it felt like he always knew she was there. And, perhaps most unnerving of all, he had started appearing at the Clover Bean more often. The first time, she thought it was a coincidence. The second time, she knew it wasn't. Sienna walked into the cafe one morning, and there he was. sitting in the corner with a cup of black coffee, reading something on his tablet. Their eyes met and he gave her a small, knowing smirk. "Good morning, Miss Parker," he said smoothly. Sienna stiffened. Morning. She quickly ordered her drink, trying to ignore the way Jenny was staring at her, her eyes flicking between Sienna and Adrian as if watching a live soap opera. Taking her coffee, Sienna debated whether to walk straight out or acknowledge him. Adrian made the choice for her. "Join me for a moment?" he asked, nodding toward the seat across from him. She hesitated. This wasn't the office. Here, there were no professional expectations forcing her to say yes. Still, refusing felt impossible. With a sigh, she sat down. "Is this a new habit of yours?" Sienna asked, raising an eyebrow. "Frequenting your own cafe?" Adrian smirked. "Perhaps, or maybe I'm just here for the caramel latte." Sienna exhaled sharply. Very funny. He studied her, amusement still dancing in his eyes. "You're different around me now." Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean? You were more relaxed before." "Before I knew you were a billionaire?" she said bluntly. Adrian chuckled. "Exactly." Sienna shifted uncomfortably. "Well, forgive me if I suddenly feel the need to be more professional, considering you're my boss now and all." "You were professional before," Adrian pointed out. "That's why I took an interest in you. You didn't treat me any differently when you thought I was just a barista. That's rare." Sienna frowned. "So, what? Was this all some kind of test?" His smile faded slightly. "Number just curiosity." Curiosity. That was almost worse, because it meant he had been watching her, observing her before she even realized it. She sipped her coffee, needing a distraction. "And what have you concluded from all your observing?" Adrian leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked onto hers. "That I'd like to know you better." Her breath caught. There was no mistaking the weight behind those words. Sienna quickly set her cup down. "I should get to work," she said, standing up. Adrian didn't stop her, but as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her. And for the first time, she wasn't sure whether she wanted to run away from him or toward him. Sienna couldn't focus for the rest of the day. Her conversation with Adrian replayed in her mind over and over again. "That I'd like to know you better." His words hadn't been casual. They had been deliberate, charged with a meaning that made her heart race. But what did he really mean? She wasn't naive enough to think that a billionaire CEO like Adrian Sinclair would suddenly be romantically interested in her, a regular corporate employee. Was he simply intrigued by how she had treated him before knowing his true identity? Or was there something more? Whatever it was, Sienna knew one thing. Getting involved with him, professionally or personally, was dangerous territory, and yet avoiding him seemed impossible. The next morning, an email notification popped up on her screen. Subject: Invitation to Executive Gala from Adrian Sinclair. Sienna's stomach flipped. She clicked it open. "Sienna, I would like for you to attend the Sinclair Enterprises Executive Gala this Friday. It will be an opportunity for you to connect with key individuals in the company and broaden your professional network. Formal attire required. Car service will be arranged if needed." Sienna stared at the email in disbelief. She wasn't an executive. The gala was a high-profile event, usually attended by senior managers, directors, and corporate partners. There was absolutely no reason for her to be invited, unless Adrian wanted her there. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain of how to respond. Before she could type anything, another message popped up, this time from Claire. "Claire, tell me you just got that email. Sienna." "Hey, what email?" Claire. "Don't play dumb. The gala email." Sienna. "I did." Claire. "Girl, what is going on? Why is the CEO personally inviting you?" Sienna. "I have no idea. That was the truth. But as much as she wanted to ignore it, her curiosity burned. By the end of the day, she had made up her mind. She was going. On Friday evening, Sienna stepped out of the black car that had been sent for her, her heart pounding against her ribs. The Sinclair Enterprises Executive Gala was held at one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. The grand ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, the guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits. She adjusted the deep emerald dress she had chosen, a sleek, elegant number that hugged her figure without being too revealing. The moment she entered, she felt eyes on her. People whispered. Some recognized her from the office, but most just seemed curious. She had barely taken a step forward when a familiar voice called her name. Sienna. She turned and found Adrian standing near the entrance, looking devastatingly handsome in a sharp black tuxedo. Her breath caught. "Mr. Sinclair," she greeted, keeping her tone professional. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Are we back to formalities now?" "We are at a work event," she pointed out. His gaze swept over her, lingering for a moment. "You look stunning." Heat rushed to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up well yourself." Adrian smirked. "I do try." Before she could respond, a group of executives approached him, offering polite nods before turning their attention to her. "And who is this lovely lady?" one of the older men asked. Sienna opened her mouth, but Adrian spoke first. "This is Sienna Parker," he said smoothly, "one of our brightest employees in the research division." The way he said it, so assured, so certain, made her stomach tighten. The executives smiled politely, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes. "Sienna, these are some of our board members," Adrian continued, gesturing toward the men. "I thought tonight would be a good opportunity for her to meet some of the key figures in the company." Sienna kept her expression composed, but internally she was reeling. Adrian was deliberately introducing her to board members. This wasn't just about her networking. This was something more. And the more time passed, the more she realized that Adrian wasn't simply a casual observer in her career. He was invested in it. As the evening progressed, Sienna found herself engaged in conversation after conversation. Surprisingly, she held her own. Her knowledge of industry trends impressed some of the executives, and by the time the dinner portion of the gala ended, she had exchanged contacts with more high-ranking individuals than she ever expected. But one thing remained consistent throughout the night. Adrian never strayed far from her, and when the music started, he appeared beside her once again. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, his voice low. Sienna hesitated. Dancing with her CEO in a room full of powerful people? The logical side of her screamed no, but the part of her that had been caught in Adrian's orbit, the part that was undeniably drawn to him, made her slip her hand into his. As they stepped onto the dance floor, Adrian's hand rested lightly on her waist, guiding her effortlessly. "You've handled tonight well," he murmured. "I'm just trying to keep up," she admitted. His lips curved into a half smile. "You're doing more than that." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world around them faded. She could feel the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress. She could smell the faint scent of his cologne. And suddenly, it didn't feel like they were in a crowded ballroom. It felt personal. Too personal. Sienna broke eye contact, swallowing hard. "You still haven't told me why you invited me here," she said. Adrian exhaled softly, his grip tightening just slightly. "Because I want you to see what you're capable of," he said. "You don't belong in the background, Sienna." Her chest tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her before. But before she could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Adrian." They both turned. A stunning woman in an expensive red gown stood at the edge of the dance floor, her eyes locked onto Adrian. There was a familiarity between them, an intensity that made Sienna's stomach twist. "Veronica," Adrian said smoothly, his expression unreadable. Veronica's gaze flickered to Sienna, assessing her in an instant. "And who is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with curiosity. Sienna stiffened. Adrian didn't hesitate. "Sienna Parker," he said. "She's with me." Sienna's heart skipped a beat. With him? Veronica raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Interesting, she mused, before turning back to Adrian. We need to talk, alone. For the first time that evening, Adrian looked tense. He hesitated before glancing back at Sienna. Give me a moment, he said. And just like that, he released her and walked away with Veronica, disappearing into the crowd. Sienna stood there, suddenly feeling cold. Who was Veronica? And more importantly, why did she feel like she had just stepped into something much bigger than she ever intended? Sienna stood frozen on the dance floor, her mind racing. Adrian's words, "She's with me," still echoed in her ears. But as soon as Veronica had arrived, his demeanor had shifted. Who was she? And what did she mean to him? Sienna's stomach twisted. The logical part of her knew she had no right to feel this way. Adrian Sinclair wasn't hers. He was her boss, a man who existed in a completely different world from hers. And yet, something had been building between them. Something real. Had she misread everything? Taking a shaky breath, Sienna stepped away from the dance floor. She wasn't going to stand there like some lost girl waiting for a man to return to her. She needed to leave. Sienna made her way through the grand ballroom, weaving past elegantly dressed guests. Leaving so soon, she turned to find Claire, who raised an eyebrow at her. "I don't belong here," Sienna murmured. Claire's eyes flickered with understanding. "This isn't just about the gala, is it?" Sienna hesitated. "Adrian left with someone." Claire frowned. "Who?" "Some woman named Veronica." Claire's expression darkened. "Veronica Hawthorne? You know her?" Claire sighed. "She's a socialite. Her family is involved in major business ventures, and she used to be close with Adrian." Sienna's heart sank. "Wait," Claire said, realization dawning on her. I need some air." Sienna cut in before Claire could say anything else. She stepped outside onto the hotel's private terrace, the cool night air hitting her skin. She closed her eyes and exhaled, trying to push away the swirling emotions. This was why she had always kept her distance from men like Adrian. They came with complications. Minutes passed before she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. "Sienna." Adrian's voice was calm, yet there was an underlying tension. She opened her eyes and faced him. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone even. His gaze searched hers. "I was looking for you." She folded her arms. "I figured you'd be busy with Veronica." Something flashed in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even frustration. "You left," he said. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Did you expect me to wait?" Adrian exhaled, stepping closer. "I didn't mean to leave so abruptly." "Then why did you—" A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Veronica and I have history. But that's all it is, history." Sienna arched an eyebrow. She didn't seem like someone who's in the past. Adrian hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "She's someone my family once expected me to marry, but I never had any intention of doing so." Sienna blinked, caught off guard. Marriage? This wasn't just some old flame. This was a woman Adrian had been expected to be with, and yet he wasn't. "Then why did you go with her?" she asked softly. Adrian sighed. "Because she wanted to remind me of the life I was supposed to have." Sienna stared at him. "And is that the life you want?" He didn't hesitate. "No." Her breath caught. His expression softened as he stepped even closer, the space between them vanishing. "I didn't invite you here tonight just for networking, Sienna," he admitted. "I wanted you here because I wanted to be with you." Her heart pounded. "Adrian, you're not like them," he continued, his voice quieter. "You don't care about status, money, or power. You never did." Sienna swallowed hard. This was dangerous. Whatever this was between them, it was more than a fleeting attraction, and that terrified her. "Adrian, we work together," she reminded him. He smirked slightly. I'm aware. This isn't just complicated, it's impossible. His smirk faded. Do you want it to be? She looked away. Because I don't, he admitted. And I don't think you do either. Silence stretched between them. Then he did something unexpected. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers, gentle, hesitant, as if giving her a choice. Sienna could have pulled away, but she didn't, because deep down she knew. She had never mistaken him for just a barista. She had mistaken herself for someone who could ever ignore what was happening between them.